What's going on, people? This is the JT Sports Show, episode 26. We have a special episode today because recurring guest Dane Moore, as you see on the screen, is back. Borsty, you are back. We're going to talk a lot about the Timberwolves, obviously. We always talk a lot about the Wolves. No Vikings today. No Gophers today. None of that junk. Well, the Vikings aren't junk this year, but the Wolves are just a roller coaster, and we're going to try and hit some things. Dane, thank you for coming on. How's it going?
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I'm good. You know, we're rolling here in. We kind of had like a break, right, where it was one game in like 6 or 7 days there, and then now it's which was a good time to kind of have a break while we were like, okay, what is this team now without Cat?
Yeah.
But now it's like it's full bore, right? Like we're recording this on Thursday afternoon, got game Friday, Saturday, Monday, like 5-game road trip. It's kind of gonna. We've talked so much, right, about like what are the Wolves going to look like without Cat? We've seen the first couple drips, and now we're gonna see what it actually is. They're gonna kind of start to define their season, right, in this no Cat time of where they can be. So to answer your question, I'm good because I find that a lot more exciting than what we kind of were watching the first month or so of the season.
Yeah, that was just disgraceful, quite honestly. And I was thinking when I knew you were going to come on, you were the one that made the weirdest team ever shirts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. This season and last year, at the beginning of the season, it was a weird team, but this team is just even almost more weird. All the weird things. I mean, the national media is talking a lot about the Wolves because of how bad the trade has looked. First thing I want to hit on is a lot of things that I've heard in podcasts from national media, whether it's Bill Simmons or then him talking with Ryan Russillo. The chemistry and body language of this team. I've been at all but one game. I didn't go to the game last night. And I haven't thought that the body language or chemistry and like in terms of players liking each other and that type of stuff has looked all that bad. They think it's the Wolves are just like they hate each other. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have a couple friends who are like coaches and scouts and stuff, and I've gotten texts from them too that have been like, "This is not the body language of a group of players that likes each other." They're not Wolves fans, just kind of like popping in. And I always kind of push back on it a little bit because I have covered teams where on the Timberwolves where the players, I think it's fair to say, did not like each other, and it doesn't, to me, feel at all similar to that. So that's what I'm going off of. And, we're back in the locker room this year. Like, that's where you see a lot of that. That's where I think you get a lot of what the vibe is. And I don't feel anything like that from previous seasons. What I did see happening is like some internal frustration from a basketball standpoint. And that's not right. That's not people disliking each other. That was, I think, we got like 20 games into the season, and this team got frustrated with the issues that were presenting themselves with two bigs, right? And that was, that was problematic. That I think that kind of dragged on the guys as they're just getting kind of literally run up and down the floor. So that's the closest thing I've seen to like real frustration in the group. But that doesn't mean that like the guys don't, just because they're frustrated with playing two bigs doesn't mean like they don't like Carl or they don't like Rudy. That's not the sense I get at all.
I've found that to be true too. I think it's more about the basketball on the court, less about the people. And a lot of me and Borsty or Jackson's text messages are all about the chemistry between whether Cat in the future and whether he is a leader, and whether a team can win with Cat being a major focal point, and especially with the roster construction of this team right now and the fact that they need leadership. And I'm not sure if you want Karl Anthony, you could disagree with this. I'm not sure if you want Karl Anthony Towns being the one trying to lead, because I know he thinks he can lead at times. And I don't know if people want to follow him. That's my thoughts on the leadership aspect and the chemistry stuff. Another thing I wanted to talk about is
I don't think it's that guys don't want like to be led by Karl. I think there's different types of leaders. Actually, Finch had a quote on this. He's like, the only thing that goes into being a leader is whether or not people want to follow you or not. There's a bunch of different ways to do that. And yeah, like, I mean, Carl's been here for a long time. People on the inside, outside, fans, whatever, like you have perceptions of who and what Carl is, and that doesn't line up with I think a lot of people's traditional image of what a leader is. I don't think that's what Carl is. I don't think that's what Carl's striving to be, because he struggles to be, because that's not who he is. Like, he's not the traditional leader in his wiring. I don't think that doesn't mean that Carl, I don't think it means that Carl can't be part of a leadership, sort of committee. Right. I think he embraced that last season Patrick Beverley led in a very different way than he did. I think Carl was cool with all that. I think really in his career, the only leadership style that maybe rubbed him the wrong way was Jimmy. Right. And so I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's not like it can't work that Carl's one of your leaders. I think if there's trepidation in it, I think Carl's always been cool with other guys leading in ways so long as he was the best player, right?
Yeah.
Like Pat Bev, that nobody's confusing Pat Bev as a better player than Carl. So that was cool. Now you have a different dynamic where, a lot of people have Rudy ranked on kind of some of those top 100 lists. People have Rudy as a better player than Carl is. So that was always a dynamic that I wanted to sort of track this year of, if Carl wasn't number one in the pecking order, how did he feel about that from a leadership standpoint? Obviously, a lot of people would like to see Ant sort of grow to that top 20, top 25 player in the league level. And then with that,
higher than that, top 10.
Yeah, well, obviously people would want him to be the best.
Yeah,
you're talking to the biggest Ant stan of all time.
Yeah,
just so you know.
What would you say? Ant like ranks in the league right now if you just made a list of the top 100 players?
I think like top 35.
Yeah, no,
I don't know. That might be a little.
I don't think. I mean, obviously, I haven't looked at it. Like, made a list recently, and he's played really well. Of late, I think in these 3 games without Carl. I mean, my biggest sort of thing right now is I think this no Carl time is really an opportunity for Ant to make a push to be an all-star. I don't think Ant was like, I think if Carl would have just stayed healthy and we got to the all-star break, like, I don't think there was the space or room for Ant.
I agree.
To play and do what he would need to do to be an all-star. Like, if Carl misses 20 games, right, and the Wolves are able to go like, I don't know, 13-7 in that time, and it's pretty clear that Ant is leading the way in that. Could Ant be an all-star? I think, like, that maybe make him an all-star, So I'm always encouraged by Ant. I would love to cover one of the best players in the league. Obviously, as a 21-year-old, there's areas of his game that clearly need to grow. But if he's already the 35th best player in the league right now, that's encouraging, because I think we know there's a lot of things that can grow.
Yeah. Well, speaking on that, first off, thanks for coming on. I'm a huge fan of you, Dane, and the podcast, especially the Monday episode with Britt. A lot of good conversation.
Today.
So this is kind of like a generic question, but first off, I hated the trade when it happened. I still hate it.
He's going to tell you this straight.
Everyone in my life knows that I hate it. But I guess, why did Connolly feel the need to blow things up like that, especially after so much positivity from last season with pretty much everybody?
He wasn't here, man.
Why did he feel the need to do it, I guess?
I think, when you're not in Minnesota and you don't know, the interwovenness of the relationships and like we were just talking about, like who Carl is, how Carl is, who Ant is, how he is, and all those sort of things. I mean, Conley made the trade a month after getting hired, right?
Yeah.
And it was something that, it wasn't like that was in the works day one when he was hired. It kind of came to be. He was still figuring out the group. He believed, and we don't know that it's not going to work. Obviously, we don't know anything to be a fact. But I think when people like yourself or other fans are in disbelief of how and why you could do that, I think that's because you were here, right? Like you watched 82 games of the Wolves last year. You felt that vibe. You knew that. That's not something that Conley or the rest of his front office that he brought in really knew. They went in with the mindset of like, we've observed these players around the league. Obviously they're huge believers in the impact of Rudy Gobert. So they focused more on that rather than focusing more on the roster that was incumbent. And in a lot of ways on paper, that makes sense, right? Like that was just kind of not saying it was a bad roster. Obviously they made the playoffs. That was a really fun team last season.
Yeah. Not perfect by any means. Yeah.
It was just like thrown together, right? Like it was some of the Rosa stuff. It was, Carl's been here it was all these different like visions of how to put a roster or coaching staff together all kind of came together and they made it work last year. But
squeezed all the juice out of the lemon.
Yeah, but like, where was that going?
Yeah.
And the answer might be better than where this is going. I don't know.
And I think it is. But like obviously last year had issues, especially the rebounding, but it was still a really young team. And especially after the playoff experience that they got, I would have to think that they'd be a lot better this season, obviously. So yeah, it's really puzzling to me. Still is. I don't know. I'm mad about it like all the time. But
do you think Finch had a lot to say with the trade? Or do you think it was Connolly?
That's the most interesting part, right?
Yeah.
Like from a he was here standpoint.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, you're never gonna. That's one of those things you're never gonna know, right? What his true if Finch was both the coach and the PO, what have he done? I do get the sense that he was more on the Conley side than the sticking with the status quo side. I know from having talked to people in the organization, they were concerned about kind of doing the New York Knicks thing from 2 years ago, the Atlanta Hawks thing, right? Where you kind of like bubble up and then you drop back down for a couple of years.
Regress.
I know they really did not want that to happen. And now was maybe this a super reactive way to address that? But I think that was the energy behind it. They're like, that is not a roster the way it's constructed to be able to win in the playoffs. I think that proved true, right? In that Memphis series, again, as fun and important as many of those players were, like that was not a roster built to last. They were going to get punked on the glass by everyone. That's who that team was going to be. So you had to make some changes. You didn't have to necessarily go get the best rim defender and rebounder in the league, but that seemed like an answer to the problems that they saw in the roster. And I get that on paper before we start factoring in all the picks and stuff like that.
Unfortunately, we got the best rebounder, and yet rebounding is still an issue.
Hold on, real quick. Yeah, last year's roster wasn't really built to win the playoffs, but is this roster, like with Towns playing the four, guarding fours, I just don't see it. And we all know about Rudy's issues in the playoffs as well, like how those Utah teams could never really get over the hump. Yeah, it's crazy.
I mean, but the issue with those Rudy, those are two kind of separate things, right? Like the issues with the Rudy teams were that Rudy
offense
could not, punish offensively teams for going small and spreading them out, right? And to be fair, we're still seeing some of those issues. That's why they lost to the Thunder, right? Thunder play 5 out. They're like super discount Clippers, right? And then with Carl, it's a huge question at the 4, right? Of how not can he do it, but how would you do it, right? What is the scheme infrastructure you put in place to be able to make it work to have Carl guard at the 4? I think what's proven to be an oversight entering the season was the idea that you play, one coverage when Rudy's on there, a different coverage when Carl's out there. That I don't know, maybe someday that can work. I think we know with the Bullet that was too confusing for the group early on. But also, I think both of the thing, like Rudy's issues in the playoffs that were connected to defense had so much to do with Utah not having strong perimeter defenders. I think a lot of the Carl issues at the 4 present themselves by breakdowns at the point of attack with perimeter defenders too.
Finch's favorite thing.
Yeah, well, Fitch brings it up all the time, but we see it. I mean, you don't need to have a basketball PhD to know that they are really struggling to defend straight line drives or to defend pick and roll. They're struggling to contain the ball. So just from a basketball standpoint, again, picks aside, I think the biggest oversight in making that move was neglecting the importance of perimeter defense while you lean into a Cat and Rudy front court. They don't have that. I mean, they're clearly Jaden McDaniels is the one reliable player they can go to get that from. It's why Austin Rivers is now in the rotation consistently, because they don't have guys who can defend on the perimeter. Austin does that at a higher level than the average other player on the team. It's why Wendell Moore has started playing. He provides a semblance of perimeter defense. So that needs to be addressed. Like big picture, whether it's this season, somewhere in the Gobert experiment is getting perimeter defense. The concern I have to bring the picks in is how do you go get that, right? Yeah. Like you don't have picks that you can trade to go out and get. It wouldn't even need to be, it could be like one guy for a first, right?
Yeah.
You just don't even have the assets to be able to go acquire that. So that's like when everyone was like, oh, who cares that the Wolves gave up first round picks?
They matter. Look at the Celtics. Look at all the Celtics players. They're all drafted in the 20s.
Dude, the draft picks, the best analogy I've ever heard for draft picks in the NBA, we always think about it like, oh, what are they going to become? And in the Wolves world, draft picks normally don't become anything, right? Historically. So people go, they don't matter. That's not true. The best comparison for draft picks are cigarettes in jail, right? It's the currency you trade to get something else, right? And even if you don't smoke, you people like compile their cigarettes so that they can trade them someday. The Wolves have no cigarettes right now. And that is going to be an issue when it comes to starting to grab other things that they need. What I think is going to eventually happen is it is going to hit them in the face that we need to change this roster in some way. And to do that, they're going to have to trade an important piece that's on the team.
Yes.
And from a young asset standpoint, like it doesn't take you very long to go, okay, no picks. Yeah. Where do we go? It's Jaden McDaniels, right? And he's the one guy who, provides the need that we're talking about there. So, I don't know. I don't know how they're going to address perimeter defense, but whether it's this season or sometime in the future, it's an obvious need.
Yeah. Yeah. One more. I may sound like I'm super negative. I swear I'm not. But like, I am the biggest Anthony Edwards fan like in the world. I mean, take my opinion for what it is, but like, I really do think he could be the best player in the league. But like, do you think they thought about him literally at all when they made this move? Like,
well, yeah, of course they did, but I get why you would say that. I mean, that was a part of the issue I had with the trade is I found the move to be betting on the Karl Anthony Towns window rather than the Anthony Edwards. Right. Because like we just said, now through, I don't know, till Ant's like 27, don't really have picks that you can trade. You use them all to try and maximize Karl when he's 27.
Exactly.
And, I mean, again, we were doing the equating how good are each, like Karl's probably a little bit better than Ant right now, whatever. But Ant has there's this idea that I think you're right in saying it's going to be, he's probably going to, when he's 27, he's probably going to be better than Karl currently is when he's 27, right?
I mean, let's hope so.
Yeah, right. I mean, but you never know. So that's what felt misguided to me. If it were me, and I know it's not this simple, but I would have waited to bet on the Ant window and have taken the risk of having that Knicks regression, that Hawks regression,
or trade for DeJounte Murray.
Well, why? They didn't really have to trade for anybody, but yeah.
I think in the realm of making an off-season trade, and again, like this could end up like working. I know it doesn't feel like that right now. Rudy Gobert is a really special player. And for a lot of Wolves fans, you've watched these 24 games he's played, and that's probably more Rudy Gobert games than you've watched in the first 8 years of his career, right? Rudy Gobert was significantly more impactful in those games. And I know that's kind of hard to envision or what exactly it looked like, but that's a fact. I mean, that Utah team was dangerous. But to get into the trade thing, I think, and I said this at the time, when you were talking about going two bigs, as Conley did, right, once he was here, I think you had to better understand that it was going to be an experiment, that it might work and then it might not. And ultimately, if you were going to take the path of going down the two bigs experiment, you should have taken, that's what I thought at the time, you should have taken a less riskier option. And I thought Miles Turner was one that you could go for there. And that obviously would not have taken 5 first-round picks to acquire him as what we understand his market value to be. Because then if it doesn't work and you get through the season, you go, no, two bigs, can't happen. Turner's a free agent. You can let him walk, sign and trade him, whatever. Now you're married to this, right? You're long term that it's Carl and Rudy in the front court. So that was, I you know what? Having covered the Wolves, having grown up here, watched the Wolves, like, you don't see this organization go all in very often. Yeah. And you have to appreciate some of that energy.
That was my biggest point from the trade. People are like, do you like the trade? Do you not like the trade? I'm like, I don't know. But I will say this, no Minnesota sports team ever goes for it like the Wolves went for it. And I agree. I was all for it.
But the thing that sucked was, like, this was probably one of the only times ever that they maybe shouldn't have gone for it.
Yeah, maybe
it doesn't work that way.
We don't know. Obviously, I'm not trying to say it's been better than it has been. Like, Wolves this season have been a tough hang, and they might continue to be. But Rudy is a very good player, and I think what's complicating it is the fact that Rudy's there, or that Carl's there. Like, I think with Cat out of the mix, some of those people who are not all that familiar with Rudy are going to begin to appreciate, like, oh, this is what he does.
Like last night.
Exactly. Yeah.
I would say I've been more on the side of cautiously optimistic versus the Wolves fan that's saying burn it down right now and it's never going to work again. Just because I know Rudy Gobert is better. Plus, I don't know if he had some injury coming into the season. He looks slow, but he's already starting to look a little quicker. I don't know. It looks like he has more bounce in his step. I do have one question, or it's more of a theory regarding the Tim Connolly trade. I don't think he's this dumb. I think, and I've heard this somewhere else, I did not make this up, but I don't think he would come in and make this massive of a trade when you have a player like Anthony Edwards, and you could just be risking it all. I think I think he had in mind that there's a potential that if it didn't work, you just trade Karl Anthony Towns and get the assets back. If it does work, great. But if it doesn't, you can get a lot of what you gave up in the Rudy Gobert trade. Do you think there's anything to that?
Yeah, well, again, we just kind of went through the other options of if you hit the point of feeling you need to pivot off of this, right? Like, brought up Jaden, that kind of feels like a dead end. There aren't the picks.
I think Carl's the clear, unfortunately.
Well, that as it should be. Again, there's due to the lack of options. Yeah, I'm not denying that. I think what's an interesting factor in that is if you're going to do that, you probably got to do it this summer.
Yeah,
because that's when he's making 34 next year, and then it jumps up to like 55. Yeah. So that really changes the dynamic from being able to. I mean, look how many players the Wolves had to ship out to take back $40 million of Rudy Gobert's salary. Like, if you waited until Cat's making 55, like, what are you even doing at that point, right? Like, that would be extremely complicated. Also, when Cat's making 55, his value is not as high as it is when he's making 35, even though that's only 1 year. So I think when everyone says, like, the move is going to be eventually to trade Cat, again, we just talked about it. I see you move through the progression. If it doesn't work, that's where you can land on. You're not just going to get back 5 first-round picks.
Correct.
You're not.
Maybe 2, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
realistic.
Yeah,
Three?
it's hard to say. But like you got to remember. Okay, so call 5 first-round picks, right? If you include Walker Kessler in that, plus wouldn't we say the salary that the Wolves sent out was plus value? I mean, I think Beverly at the time, that's 13 million on an expiring.
Vanderbilt's a lethal shooter.
Yeah, well, Vanderbilt, but in all seriousness, like Vanderbilt at 4, that's a positive value contract. Bolmaro is not a lot of money.
No.
Rookie contract still.
Beasley's valuable.
Beasley, I mean, and Beasley would be the one of them that you would say is a negative value contract. So I'm just saying it wasn't only 5 first-round picks. It was also positive money going out, or at least neutral, right? And so that to me suggests that Carl would get back more than 2, even if it was up at the 50 million number. I mean, look what DeJounte went for. Again, he's making a little bit less money. Look at what Donovan Mitchell went for. I mean, I think that if and when I let my head go to the place of like, oh, maybe they will have to trade Carl at some point. I mean, look what Utah got back from Mitchell, right?
Yeah.
And if you could get a guy like Markkanen plus a handful of valuable picks, like I think it would be more than the 2 you suggested, but I think it would be significantly less than what Gobert went for. And a lot of that has to do with Carl's money being bigger.
All right.
Wait, hold on. One more thing.
I want to get to positive.
Yeah, well, this kind of is positive, I guess. But I mean, how long is it?
Dreadful.
We basically just talked about this, but like, how long is it, do you think, before Connolly like accepts the defeat with like, yeah, this isn't going to work. We need to trade Towns. Like this summer, you kind of said this summer, right? Like
that would be the very, very, very earliest. Like,
okay. What would he need to see? Would it need to be a first-round exit? Would it need to be, I don't know,
a first-round exit? If they make the playoff, a first-round exit, he's not doing anything.
No, I think in all seriousness, I think it would need to be like
miss the playoffs.
And it would just it would be even like broader than that. It would just be obvious that this wouldn't work. That's when if they need to make a move, that's when it would be. And I know to you, it's obvious right now. I just know I've talked to them. It's not obvious to them right now that it won't work. So they are going to give it more than 21 games of Rudy and Carl playing together. Correct. They are going to lean into the idea that they didn't have training camp together and all of those sort of things. And that this was and is complicated. I mean, it is complicated, So any sort of like pining for a trade, like it's why I'm not talking about it. It's not a conversation that's anywhere near. Though I acknowledged it. Like, yeah, if they do run into dead ends, that's probably the path in the maze that you go down. But things would need to go worse than they've already gone, I think.
D'Angelo Russell, early in the season, it wasn't all about the cat, or I guess it really isn't all about the cat trade, but it wasn't as much about the Rudy and Cat thing as a lot of talk was about how poor D'Lo was playing. And as of late, I think since that Cleveland game on the road, he's been a different player for whatever reason. Do you see anything for why? I think he's just like a confidence player. Like when he has confidence, he just starts making shots. When he doesn't, he can't shoot it through the ocean. What do you think of the D'Lo? And like another thing, him and Rudy without Cat, you think that sets up better for D'Lo?
Yeah, to answer that, yeah, I think it does. I think it's simpler. D'Lo said that himself. Doesn't mean he thinks it's better with Cat out of the mix, but it is simpler. And as you're trying to, on both sides of the ball, like stack principles of what you can do, it's in a way, this could be a blessing in disguise where it simplifies things. You figure out what that Rudy D'Lo pick and roll game looks like more, and you're able to play off of that and maybe plug Carl back into that as a souped up Kyle Anderson, right? I think some of that will happen. And then I think with D'Lo, to the slow start part of the question, I think we got to remember that D'Lo started really slow last year too. And I think a lot of that with him has to do, again, this is something he said, not knowing the roster. New team, different group. I think at the beginning of last season, they're playing a different way. It takes him a while to acclimate to change, and specifically change that like lands on him. They played a completely different style of defense last season. His role in, being the quarterback of the offense, like with different pieces around you, that might take you some time to acclimate. Is that an excuse? No, we wanted and expected D'Lo's play to be better at the beginning of the season, but look, as time has gotten on, I'm not at an all-star level or anything like that, but it is improving, and I think that's a product of growing comfort. People oftentimes say confidence. I don't really think that is what it is. I think he's a pretty confident player. I think he gets lost in his mind sometimes, trying to figure things out, playing 3D chess when the rest of his team isn't. And I mean, it's been better. I think he's another player who could benefit like Rudy and Ant in this non-Carl time, again, just because it's simpler.
Late games, it sort of connects to the D'Lo thing because he has the ball in his hands a lot. Do you think it makes more sense to have Anthony Edwards right now running the point late in games because he can sort of just take over a game? Or do you like D'Lo having the ball? And then when Carl comes back, how does he fit into this? Because then it gets even more jumbled. You have so many players. And I think that's just a sort of a negative to having this many star guys late in games who's shooting the ball. And I think that's why the team has struggled a lot last year.
I don't think the Wolves play with a point guard. That's not. I mean, they run like pistol action pretty much every time to start every possession.
But when Ant has the ball, like sometimes, like in the Memphis game, he was bringing the ball up late in the game, and usually when that happens, he doesn't pass it, and so he'll just take over. Well, I mean, like he's just way more aggressive.
I think we can tend to oversimplify things by thinking about basketball as it used to be, where it was like the Chris Paul style, right? And that he still does that in the NBA today, where you're literally the quarterback and the action is moving around you. The Wolves, Chris Finch does not play that way. D'Angelo plays off ball a ton, Ant plays off ball a ton, and it's an interchange offense, right? You are shifting who your point of attack offensive player is consistently. I understand what you're getting at is
it's more late in the game. Like throughout the middle of the game, I totally agree. It's very free flowing, but late in the game it gets slower and I don't know, maybe it gets more stagnant. And then when Ant has the ball, he just does stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, D'Lo's numbers are better in the clutch. I mean, it's just like I hear what you're saying, and you want more Ant in those times. That's
not necessarily. He would. Borsty would. I
feel like most people would, right?
Yeah, and I get it. I think the issue that happens there often is when it is an action that happens and puts Ant off ball to start the action, he checks out oftentimes. Correct. And I think that's actually on him because, like I was trying to say, the offense isn't meant to be, you go ahead, let's go. And I'm going to stand here in the corner. You are supposed to temporarily be in the corner, and then you were supposed to interchange again. You're supposed to move. And I think this is a product of being young. When he finds himself in the corner, that's when he kind of takes his deep breath and cools down. That should honestly be the time where he raises up and D'Lo's coming off a pick and roll action. You swing it to Ant on the second side, and he's able to attack the gap. Unless you want to go like the Luka model, that the Ja model, the Harden model, where it's just Ant every single time, there is going to be an interchange here, and they're going to have to play off of each other. I think it's an interesting idea to say, should you try and evolve Ant into being more of a Luka Doncic type initiator on offense?
Maybe just late game.
Sure. Better not be putting him on John Morant then on the other side of the floor, because that's not what Luka's doing. That's not what Ja's doing. That's not what Harden's doing.
Correct.
Again, his team has no perimeter defenders really outside of Jaden McDaniels. They are relying heavily on Anthony Edwards to play defense on the other side of the ball, particularly late in games. So you can't have Ant have a 40% usage rate on offense and rely on him to do things late in the game. So if you want to shift Ant into that role, you better change the roster in a significant way. That's my stance on it.
Totally. I totally get it. Let's see. The defense, and then we'll let you go because I don't want to take too much more of your time. The switching 1 through 5 versus switching 1 through 4 and the Rudy like in the drop. What's the difference between everybody switching just in simplified terms? I never played basketball versus the switching 1 through 4 concept.
Yeah. So we saw again. We're recording this after the Indiana game, and they haven't done much. Switching 5 means any sort of screen happens, you're just changing it, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Even if you're 7-2, you'll switch on to a 6-2 guy, just because you've decided you don't want to leave any space, and you'll take your risks in isolation, right? And that's what they did against Indiana, because there was every time they were setting a high screen with Miles Turner, there was too much space between to be able to recover, Rudy to be able to recover back to Turner if they hit him on the pop, right? So you switch that, Jaden stays glued to Turner, and Rudy finds himself on Buddy Hield right there. The reason you want to stay away from that, or they have stayed away from that in general, is like a base defense, is you don't want Rudy out on the perimeter. Like consistently, his value comes from being at the rim. Now, I think he can acquit himself pretty well as a perimeter defender, given his size, as we saw in the final possession of the game when he got switched on to Buddy. Buddy attacked him. He recovered. He blocked the shot, right? Like, I think Rudy has that in his game, but what's the opportunity cost there of pulling him out of the drop from being at the rim? Like, Rudy won Defensive Player of the Year 3 times playing exclusively drop coverage in Utah, and it's an effective defense. It's what the majority of teams did. Like, the Boston Celtics did it against the Golden State Warriors in the finals.
Dane, why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we doing drop coverage all the time?
Because they don't feel like they can run that. They don't feel like they have the personnel to be able to run that when Rudy's off the floor. They feel that Nas is better activated up in coverage. That's the high wall we talk about all the time. Putting 2 guys on the ball to blitz it there. And you're just trying to force the ball out of the ball handler's hands. Then you scramble back, right? We talk about the scramble defense. Then Nas or Cat are sprinting back to the big, who's now rolled down to the block. You know, you need to go quickly there. And you know what? We saw last year, they were the 13th in defense last season after having been bottom 10 in defense every year of Carl's career. That is the best defense for Carl. The complication, so they were like, all right, like, we'll play that way when Carl's on. We'll play drop.
Too complicated.
On. That makes sense in theory, but it's hard to toggle, and you no longer have the scrambling personnel like that.
Right.
That the high wall defense is hard, man. Like, that is, you're like remember like the pacer test where you had to go touch the free throw line, run back. Like, it's like that. Like, you are busting your ass to move there. And when you have Patrick Beverley and Jared Vanderbilt, those are players who can play in that context better than Kyle Anderson, who's significantly slower, right?
Yeah.
Excuse me. There isn't one right answer, and what they're now they went to at the beginning of the season was, all right, we're going to play a lot of zone. And then it's like, all right, we're getting exposed in that way. Situation. So they're just going situationally now. They want to play drop with Rudy as much as possible. And then situationally, I think they're going to switch more and make that happen as well.
All right. Well, I think we took enough of your time. This was some good basketball talk. I think.
Dane, I got one more, short one.
I guess you're not going quite yet.
Yeah, just one more. I don't know the exact contract situations, but do you think Jalen Noel, McLaughlin, and Naz Reid will all be back next year?
No.
No. Okay.
Odds are not all 3. Like, well, Jordan's is a team option, right? Like, I think he almost certainly will.
Okay.
You can that's $2 million, like Jordan, or 2.5 or something like that. Like, Jordan's obviously worth that. I'm sure they'll opt him into that.
I'm cool with him being the backup point guard for the next 15 years.
Sure. He'll be 41. Yeah, I think he probably will still be in the league. Like that one, makes that simple. The Nas and Jalen one is tough. It's also hard to define what their values are going to be. I mean, this is kind of like in the weeds, but there's a couple of guys like Jalen Noel who signed like 4-year, $24 million, like $6 million a year extensions. John Conchar with the Grizzlies, Dean Wade did that with the Cavs. That's what I was kind of looking at, like entering the season, what that number would be. About $6 million a year for Jalen. And then he starts the season great, right? And you go, well, man, I don't know. I'm like, probably some team would give him the mid-level for like 9 or 10 or something like that. So it's hard to pin down exactly what his value would be. But again, at the end of the day, it comes down to how much room do you have to play with here, right? Like, I think to have both Nas and Jalen back, just from a money standpoint, you almost have to let D'Lo walk, right?
Oh,
and,
yeah, that was my next question. Yeah.
You know, and like off of that, and then Nas is, I mean, you guys know, like I'm a big Nas believer. I've been impressed with what he's done in 4 years, but like, I don't know, what's that contract? So it depends on what the numbers are, what your just overall sort of financial plan is for this, because you do have Rudy 40 plus on the books until his contract's done. Carl's jumps up into the 50s, up to 60 by the end of his contract. Ant's about to sign a max contract extension that will be for like 40, high 30s a year and ascend from there. Jaden, I mean, don't we think Jaden will probably sign for like, I mean, with the cap going up, maybe like 25 million a year? You can't, like, it's going to be extremely hard to keep all of those things together, or you could keep them all together, but then you can't add other things. And we just talked about, maybe you need a point guard if D'Lo walks. You need perimeter defenders. Like, the nature of the NBA is guys leave. Those are two guys I really like. I've been here covering them their whole career. They're good dudes too.
Yeah. Winning players.
I mean, developing into winning players. But really work hard. Like,
for sure.
That is not always the case. I'd love to see them both stay, but money's, you gotta kind of pick a D'Lo path.
And what are you hearing on that front with D'Lo?
I mean, it was just entering the season, like the value wasn't there. Teams were, one thing I heard was teams were like, yeah, we would be interested in taking on D'Lo and leaning into him and giving him the starting point guard job if it was, $20 million a year. It's 30, and these are all factors that teams have to be considering too. Like, for them, another $10-12 million limits what they can do elsewhere. So the hope, right, was you can, recoup value in D'Lo, and maybe he just works. Maybe he just fits with Rudy with a rolling big, and you're just like, mate, this is the point guard we want to have. There's a chance of that. Or they just thought, it couldn't get, his value couldn't get like lower. They were going to be trading him as a negative contract. Maybe this summer in a sign and trade, then your contract's neutral, right? You're whatever that team is signing for. So they were in a tough place with that. And what they do with D'Lo in the future, I think, remains the same. What does this end up being?
Yeah.
How good does he fit in a Carl and Rudy context? That's what the question is with basically every player on the roster outside of Ant. Like, he's here, but you need to, like, again, even with Jaden, right? How good does he fit in the context of a Carl and Rudy team? Jalen, Nas, all those guys. Like, until and we don't know anything yet, man. Like,
it's just a shame that that's what we're asking. Like, that we're asking, how does it fit in the Carl and Rudy thing instead of Edwards? It's a shame, in my opinion.
Yeah, but man,
I'm not trying to be funny. I'm just saying. Like,
no, I hear it. I understand the frustration everyone has. It's just, I don't know, maybe it's because, this is my job and I have to do it. But I just think, like, the healthiest thing to do, even if you're just a fan, is to let go of it. It is this is it, Right. So if you're going to be going to all the games, like, embrace that this is what it is. Like, or don't watch the Timberwolves for the next 4 years.
That's what I told you.
I'm not actively rooting against the team. No, I want the team to win more than anything. Like, no one wanted it to work more than me, but I just have my doubts,
I hear you. It's just like, it's done.
Yeah.
It happened.
This sounds like our conversations when we're texting.
No, it's good perspective for me too, because like, I can get in like robot brain of just like, what is happening, what isn't happening. I understand it, man. If I was a Wolves fan, like, I would have frustration because it does seem like there's a possibility here that the beginning of this Ant window is going to get kind of messed up by this. I understand.
Don't.
I understand that trepidation, but we don't know. We don't know anything. Whenever I think I know, we don't know what it will be, and what we're seeing night in and night out in the fan base, in the locker room, in all of our. It's doing this right. It's like if Buddy Hield doesn't drive on Rudy and Rudy doesn't block it at the rim, and instead he takes a step back three and wins that game.
Ugh.
Everything feels so different.
Yeah,
and like. It's not that different of an outcome, right? Like it's just that's what happened. It's just the best thing is just to like cool it down and move on and ask yourself, like, what's the best thing that they can do in the roster that they do have. It's a bummer for me to kind of see like the glaze rolling over Timberwolves fans' eyes, because that thought that this trade sucked has just like insidiously attacked their brain. And I'm like, I hear you. I'm not saying that opinion's wrong, but it's not going to be fun. And this isn't a 1-year thing. So like get on board or
positivity. Positivity.
It's actually objectivity. Honestly, it is. This is the reality of the situation. So, I mean, I don't know. We'll see what it ends up being. But in the meantime, I'm enjoying not even thinking about Cat right now.
Same,
right?
I am too.
Like, trust me, he is.
It's a fun, different way to look at the team, right? And this interim period is really important too for when Carl gets back. Like, if they're not able to be 500, if they're not able to be like stacking winning concepts, the final 40 games of the season aren't going to matter. So like this matters now. I don't know.
So say we go 5 games over 500. 5 games over 500 without Cat. Does that give the front office like the incentive of, I mean, we've already kind of covered this, but like, does that kind of give them more confidence in kind of building around Edwards a little earlier than they'd hoped? Or how does that?
I think the first step would be a belief that you can integrate Carl into what is working, know?
Yeah.
And that to me sounds like a logical, like, recourse of like, okay, before they go whatever, what we say 13-7 in the no Cat time. The first thing that their heads aren't going to go to is trade Carl. The first thing their heads are going to go to is, can we put Carl into this and in the next 20 be 15-5? And then if it isn't that, if it's 5-15, if it's 7-13, then you got to look yourself in the mirror and you got to go, all right, what are we doing? Acknowledging a mistake, maybe at that time, further acknowledging that a mistake was made. But I'm just telling you, they're going to be patient this year. They're going to let this play out, particularly because we're going to be halfway through the season and Carl's going to have played 20 games.
Right.
Like that again is the reality of the situation.
Yeah. Dane, thank you for coming on. Took a lot of your time, but everybody go listen to the Dane Moore NBA podcast. Are you gonna give a John Krasinski a fist bump next time you see him?
I will just for you. I'll say it's probably, no, I love that John's doing it, man. It's like that I don't know. The basketball media, I'm biased, but I think basketball media is really strong these days, and a lot of it exists on the internet, podcast, YouTube, writing, whatever. I would love to see more smart people like John incorporate that high basketball awareness of the team they cover and put it on TV. That should be something that we see more and more of. So I'd love to see John doing that, and excited to watch it this season.
Yeah, I'm also biased, but I think the Wolves, you, Chris, Hine, Krasinski, Jace, Britt, you guys do a fantastic job of covering the team for a team
for sure,
for a team that has been one of the worst franchises for a long time till the last couple of years. You guys hit it out of the park. So
very lucky.
Thank you for coming on. Hopefully we can talk again maybe a little later in the season. Hopefully this conversation is less about trades, more about playoff previews, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But everybody listening, Follow us on all social media platforms, like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. But other than that, we'll be back next week. Thank you for watching. We gone.